Okay. Welcome back, everybody. I'm glad to welcome you back for the afternoon session. It was, of course, a great sorrow to us to hear of Peter Carroll's passing last week. We are incredibly lucky, grateful to have the talk that he would have given. It will be given here by Zoom by Sebastian Faber. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you for being here with us.
Yes, so my name is Sebastian Faber. I'm a professor of Hispanic Studies at Oberlin College in the United States. Peter Carroll was a very good friend of mine for 25 years. He and I worked together in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade archives, ALBA, which is an educational nonprofit founded in the late 1970s, whose purpose is to keep alive the memory of the American volunteers who fought in the Spanish Civil War. Peter and I, among other things, co-edited our quarterly magazine, The Volunteer. And it was a great shock to lose Peter so suddenly Monday, a week ago. And I want to dedicate this reading of his talk to his memory. If you're interested in reading more about Peter and his life and career, there's an obituary that I wrote that you can get to quickly at tinyurl.com/Peter N. Carroll. You can also just Google it and find it. So the text I'm going to read was written by Peter, and the images are my selection. Here we go. I never met Paul Robeson unless I was introduced to him at the age of 3 when my big sister attended summer camp, Wochica, Workers' Children Camp, and she took a photograph of him that we cherished from that brief meeting. Paul was there to sing for the children, and I believe that my father accompanied him on the piano. A quick parenthesis. So Peter's father was a pianist and musical arranger who made a living when Peter was a kid as a music teacher at Peter's high school in Queens, New York. I'll continue with Peter's talk. I'm not sure of that, but our family considered Paul Robeson a saint. A few years later, I overheard my father and mother describing the violent attack at Peekskill, New York, in 1949. That conversation has haunted my memories. Here's a couple of images from that. So being invited here to pay respects to the great man is a great opportunity for me. As an historian and a close friend of the late Sterling Stuckey, I'm pleased to be in the company of scholars and teachers who carry on the struggle for freedom and justice. As for me, I grew up listening to Paul Robeson's recordings on 78 vinyls, including some that he had sung for the volunteers in the International Brigades during the Spanish Civil War. Music is the way most people get introduced to Robeson, the man, the activist in my family, the hero, and the victim. His greatness endures despite having the US government thrusting all its power against a single person. And his journey to wartime Spain in January 1938 was part of the broadening of his knowledge and his influence. His thirst for the music of common people, sacred spirituals or secular lyrics, was part of his passion to find links to all cultures. By then, his most famous performance was Allman River that came from the theater and film Showboat, 1935. Whenever Paul Robeson offered to sing spontaneously to an audience, that was the song most often requested. But amid the turmoil of the Spanish Civil War, Paul Robeson introduced new lyrics that demonstrated how current events were changing his political interests. Which brings us to the Spanish Civil War, foreshadowing the terrors of the mid-20th century. The stakes in Spain would leave a heavy legacy that in some ways still affects international relations today. For Paul Robeson, the crisis of the 30s began with Mussolini's attacks in Ethiopia, the oldest independent African country, in 1935. At that time, Robeson was living in England and understood the impending threat to democratic values. Meanwhile, in the United States, African Americans, let me pull this up for a second. African Americans rallied to support Ethiopia, trying to organize military and medical aid via street demonstrations in Chicago and New York. But that war ended before assistance could reach Ethiopia. The 1930s, remember, was a decade of depression with severe unemployment throughout Europe. Spain was among the poorest countries and governed by a king. The old Spanish Empire was in a state of collapse. In 1931, the king abdicated and the Second Spanish Republic, led by an elected Cortes, parliament, replaced the dictatorship and initiated what we would call liberal reforms. Women were allowed to vote and serve in government. The established Catholic Church lost its monopoly of marriage and education. Women could get divorced and become educated. The Republic also launched a major school building program. The old ruling class did not like these changes because they threatened the powers of the aristocracy, the military, and the church. The legalization of labor unions threatened corporate leaders. The threat of expropriation of agricultural lands infuriated the large landowners, and so on and so on. Despite the new policies, election results in Spain tended to be middle of the road, though the traditional class system continuously resisted reform. In February 1936, as people like Robeson were worrying about the emergence of fascism in Europe, a left-wing coalition called the Popular Front won a bitter fight to govern Spain. And at that moment, the military, landowners, and the Catholic hierarchy began planning a coup to kill the Spanish Republic. In the summer of 1936, the rebellion against the legal government in Spain began. Led by General Francisco Franco and other generals, the army announced the rebellion in July 36 and started to take over local governments. But in Spain's largest cities, Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, local militias fought against the army, and it appeared that the rebellion had failed. The army leaders then made appeals to Mussolini and to Hitler for military aid. With the support of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, the tide was turned, and the Spanish Civil War became the cutting edge where anti-fascists had a chance to fight back against the aggressors. Most of the so-called Western democracies, remembering the disaster of World War I, refused to engage against Hitler and Mussolini and chose instead policies of neutrality and isolationism. Only Mexico and Stalin's Soviet Union supported the Spanish Republic, and both nations had limited resources, even as Hitler's Luftwaffe and Mussolini's infantry attacked the legal Spanish government. In this emergency, the Communist International called for volunteers to form an international army to save the Republic. Some 35,000 men and women from 52 countries then made their way to Spain, where they joined the newly formed International Brigades of the Republican Army. Many were Jews who had fled their homelands to the West. And from the United States, about 2,800 joined what is now known as the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Paul Robeson followed the news from Spain, concerned about the rising threat of fascism. He saw Spain as the critical opportunity to stop the spread of fascism, and he lamented the failure of the major powers to intervene to save the Republic. In a radio broadcast in 1937, he made his position explicit. He said, "Like every true artist, I've longed to see my talents contributing in an unmistakably clear manner to the cause of humanity. Every artist, every scientist, every writer must decide now where he stands. There are no impartial observers. The battlefront is everywhere. The artist must take sides. He must elect to fight for freedom or for slavery. I have made my choice. I had no alternative. I stand with you in unalterable support of the government of Spain. May your meeting rally every Black man to the side of Republican Spain. The liberation of Spain from the oppression of fascist reactionaries is not a private matter of Spaniards, but the common cause of all advanced and progressive humanity." Paul began to make public appearances to support Spain, raising funds for Basque child refugees, or to subsidize medical aid for civilians and soldiers, or to put pressure on governments to ally with the Republic. His audiences responded enthusiastically, and it was at one rally at the Albert Hall in London that he startled the jubilant crowd by changing the lyrics of his most popular song, Old Man River. What he had sung thousands of times before, I'm tired of living and scared of dying, now became, I must keep fighting until I'm dying. And he never went back to the old words. Soon afterward, near the end of December 37, Paul told his wife Essie that he wanted to go to Spain. This is our fight, my fight, he told her. U.S. neutrality laws designed to prevent civilian casualties drawing the country into war refused to permit Americans to enter Spain, passports declared not valid for travel to Spain. Volunteers for the International Brigades had to enter Spain secretly by climbing over the Pyrenees at night or by hiding on ships from France. Obviously, this discouraged many from going there and made the journey extremely dangerous for those who did. The Robesons faced bureaucratic delays, but the State Department eventually gave them proper papers. They reached the Spanish border on January 23, 1938. They were preceded by a substantial contingent of African Americans serving in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Their recruitment was largely the result of membership in the Communist Party, the largest political organization in the U.S. that welcomed Black membership. By 1938, approximately 90 to 100 African Americans, including some from the Caribbean, had been fighting and dying in the first fully integrated American Army, racially mixed from top to bottom. For the first time, Black officers would command white soldiers in battle. The Robesons' first stop was at Beni Kassim, and I have a picture of that to share with you. This is Paul Robeson at Beni Kassim Hospital, a hospital base for injured soldiers. As our car came to a standstill, Essie Robeson wrote in her diary, I noticed a young Negro soldier. He saw Paul and stopped dead and stared. When we got out of the car, he gazed, astonished, and Paul went up and spoke to him. He said he recognized Paul at once, but simply could not believe his eyes. So it went as convalescing soldiers wounded in battle found themselves in the presence of perhaps the most famous Black person in the world. Saw lots of Negro comrades, as he noted, as she caught some names. All were thrilled to see us and talked at length with Paul. The officers soon arranged a meeting at the local church, and Paul sang for the man. Waterboy, Old Man River, Lonesome Road, Fatherland, they stomped and applauded each song, Essie wrote. Paul loved doing it. And so they lingered for a few days, speaking to men and various government officials. Among the officers was a certain Lieutenant K, who escorted the visitors and told them the story of Captain Oliver Law. The lieutenant seems to have stuck to the facts as best we can know them. Law was part of the first group of Americans to arrive in Spain in January 1937. He had served in the U.S. Army during the World War and rose to the rank of corporal. In the Lincoln's first battle at Jarama, when casualties were very high, Oliver Law had operated a machine gun efficiently, and he began to rise through the ranks. Soon enough, he found himself leading the full battalion, an unprecedented status in U.S. history. Lieutenant K claimed that all the men, even white men, respected and loved Oliver Law, though we now know that a few whites questioned the quality of his leadership. Nonetheless, Law led the Lincolns into battle at Brunete, charging up the hill into a volley of bullets, and Law was killed in action. Hearing that story, Robeson realized its potential for a Hollywood movie and said he would try to make it. But like many movies, this one was never formally proposed or made. Here's a couple of more photographs of the Robeson trip to Spain I'm going to share with you. This is where Robeson sang to the troops in Tarazona, and this is a group shot with Robeson in the middle there, always sort of sticking out above everybody else in Tarazona. This is in Madrid in January with Charlotte Haldane to his side. Here we are also in Madrid in 1938. This is Robeson in Barcelona in January 38. And there's actually a short clip of moving footage of a newsreel. It's just like a half a minute. I just quickly want to share with you because it's amazing. Oh, sorry. This is before we get to that. This is later back in the United States, where Robeson is singing along with some Lincoln vets, including a Dutchman, Bart van der Schelling, who was a baritone like Robeson.
Paul Robeson, el famós cantant nord-americà, és un gran enamorat de la nostra terra. Invitat per les autoritats republicanes, ha visitat els fronts on es lluita per les llibertats del món. Moments abans de deixar Barcelona i Espanya, es prestà a ésser pres per l'objectiu del nostre cameraman i aquest gran coneixedor del nostre folklore cantar als segadors, com es pot veure quan puntuava el bon cop de fals, després signar el llibre d'or del comissariat de propaganda amb un bon cop de fals.
So this is the Catalan commentary to the newsreel in which they mention that Robeson sang the Catalan national anthem, Els Segadors. The Robesons continue their tour in Spain, stopping to chat with volunteers and offering brief concerts of familiar songs. At one point, they came upon the American battalion resting before they went into battle. Seeing Paul about to sing, the young Harry Belafonte, a musician from Illinois, jumped up to accompany him at the piano. And that little pause in the war was long remembered. Only weeks later, machine gun fire blasted Belafonte's right wrist, making him, after the war, into a one-armed pianist who performed in Chicago clubs. Of the names recorded in Essie Robeson's diary, few survived the Spanish Civil War. Paul's enthusiasm for the Spanish cause also focused on broad, lifelong musical interests. His search for a common musical language among diverse peoples focused on the guitar and flamenco songs. In conversation with the Cuban poet Nicolas Guillen, Paul suggested that the flamencan song is black in its rhythm and its sad depths. To Robeson, this was his own people's music, the sorrowful spirituals. Such songs, he explained to a reporter, came from the lips of the people of other continents who suffer and struggle to make equality a reality. I have never met such courage in a people, Paul summed up his journey to Spain. We must know that Spain is our front line. If we allow Republican Spain to suffer needlessly, we will ourselves eventually suffer as deeply. Which, of course, is what happened. Hitler and Mussolini continued to support the fascist side, providing men and munitions, and especially aviation, and the Western powers continued policies of non-intervention. 14 months after the Robesons paid homage to the Spanish people, the armies of General Franco marched into Madrid in March 1939 and declared the death of democracy in Spain. 6 months later, Hitler's air force began bombing Poland, launching the Second World War. Some of those planes and pilots had practiced in Spain. The Robesons' brief journey involved meeting political leaders of the Republic, newspaper reporters honoring his presence. He sent a radio broadcast of support, and he sang on numerous occasions to soldiers and civilians as the Robesons made their way to Madrid and Barcelona. Their affection for the members of the Lincoln Brigade was mutual. At the first annual reunion of the veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, VALB, in Chicago in 1940, the vets made Paul an honorary member of the brigade, an honor given to only one other civilian, Dr. Ed Barsky, who worked with the American Medical Corps in Spain. And still later, when Paul's life was in danger of attacks by right-wing Americans, individual vets served as his bodyguards after the riots at Peekskill in 1949, and later as he traveled in the United States. There are many legacies of the Spanish Civil War that are linked directly to the spirit of Paul and Essie's journey to Spain. One of the names she listed in her diary was Ted Gibbs, who was a volunteer from Chicago. Ted Gibbs has a daughter named Michelle D. Gibbs, who is a good poet who wrote a piece called To Begin. And Peter wanted me to read that to you, so I'm going to read that to you here. And I'm going to show it so you can read along. To begin, I am a child of rent parties, poker, and potato salad nights. Lead belly and bird on the box, steaming tamales on the street, and inside, body heat, the beat of cards slapped down, bottle caps, the pot raked in, a break called, and dancing set to begin. Of hot debates and grand reunions, when the Chicago vets from Spain would gather at our place, and the great Paul Robeson would put me on his lap, and the rumble from his laugh filled me from within. And the songs, Viva la Quince Brigada, Valley of Jarama, and Let My People Go. In 1997, Harry Belafonte spoke to a reunion in New York of the Lincoln, in Chicago, I have to say. In 1997, Belafonte spoke to a reunion in Chicago of the Lincoln vets. And he said the following: as a young boy growing up in the streets of Harlem in the United States, the idea that fascism should be everyone's concern and should be confronted vigorously came to me very early on. At the age of 17, I volunteered to fight in the Second World War. I joined the United States Navy knowing full well that what I was doing was only enhancing the carrying forth of the mandate that had been given by those who had fought in Spain. It's interesting to me that I should have been blessed in those early years of decision-making by having been embraced by a man who had a profound effect on me, on my life, Paul Robeson. And it was from Paul that I learned Viva la Quince Brigada, rumbala, rumbala, rumbala. It was from Paul that I learned Los Cuatro Generales. And it was from Paul that I learned that the purpose of art is not just to show life as it is, but to show life as it should be. And that if art were put into the service of the human family, it could only enhance their betterment. Paul said to me, he said, Harry, get them to sing your song, and they will want to know who you are. And if they want to know who you are, you've gained the first step in bringing truth and bringing insight that might have helped people get through this rather difficult world. Shortly before he died, I visited Paul in Philadelphia. He was living at his sister's. And I looked at this giant of a man who was quite frail in body, but still strong in spirit. And through all that had engulfed him, McCarthyism, the difficult times that he faced in his country because of his beliefs, because of his resistance to oppression, I looked at him and I said, Paul, I must know, was all that you have gone through really worth it? Considering the platform you had gained and how easy life could have been for you, was it worth it? And he said, Harry, make no mistake. There is no aspect of what I've done that was not worth it. Although we may not have achieved all the victories we set for ourselves, may not have achieved all the victories and all the goals we set for ourselves, beyond the victory itself, infinitely more important was the journey. To the men and the women whom I've met along the way, Paul made the difference. Paul's strong center, his strength and his power and his gift was the fact that he stood in Spain with the Lincoln Brigade and sang in Madrid at the height of the war in Spain. That was Harry Belafonte speaking in 1997 to a meeting of the veterans of the Lincoln Brigade. So to close this talk, I want to read a poem that Peter wrote. Peter was an historian, a journalist, and a poet who published more than 10 collections of poetry. This is a poem that Peter wrote in tribute to Paul Robeson in 2008 in Barcelona. And it was first published as part of an exhibit titled I Have a Dream, International Tribute Exhibition to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So this is Peter, and again, I'll allow you to read along with this poem by Peter. Here we go. This is Peter Carroll's poem. Paul Robeson went to Spain in wartime, bringing his powerful baritone voice to the anti-fascist struggle in defense of the elected Spanish Republic under attack by a right-wing army supported by Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. He'd already foreshadowed his commitment in a concert at London's Albert Hall, 1937. He told no one intentions in advance, but when he came to Old Man River, he sang a new lyric and never again returned to the original. No more would we hear, I'm tired of living and scared of dying, but a vow, I must keep fighting until I'm dying. And to the US volunteers fighting fascism with guns and bullets, including 100 African Americans, he embodied the vast resistance of free civilians putting their lives on the line, yet losing the war. After Spain, back in America, Robeson taught the songs, all your tears of sorrow, we shall avenge them, and all our age-old bondage will break asunder. Harry Belafonte took notes. La lucha continua, the war continued in the Jim Crow Army against fascism. The Red Cross segregated colored blood. A captain court-martialed Jackie Robinson for refusing the back of the bus. La lucha continua, they were already, when Rosa Parks did not stand up, in the fight when Dr. King dreamed. To give my life to something eternal and absolute, not to these little gods that are here today and gone tomorrow. Robeson's Spanish Civil War veterans re-entered front lines in Mississippi, Southside Chicago, Louisville, Harlem, Selma, Newark, Detroit, Seattle, Sacramento, San Francisco, LA. La lucha continua, the struggle goes on until I'm dying and goes on. Thank you. That was my talk. That was Peter's talk, I have to say.
Okay, we obviously cannot ask Peter questions, but it would be nice if we could have a few minutes of discussion. Are you willing, Sebastian? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Why
I'm
don't
happy
we-
to answer questions to the extent that I can as well, but
Good,
I'm happy to help with the discussion, absolutely.
great, thank you. Yes, go ahead, wait for the mic, please.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, and I could listen to it only quite moved to hear that. Yeah, okay, better. Thank you very much. I could hear. I was moved to hear that Peter Carroll is no longer with us, but this paper, what he delivered, is a kind of a great testimony. Yeah, and it brings me to the idea to remind you that this internationalism, yeah, was also was also the case in Palestine. Jewish and Arab communists recruited a battalion of about 300 people. About 80% were Jews, and about 20% were Arabs to volunteer in Spain, and this is quite, and this is not often enough, or this is too often overlooked. Also, I may remind, I'm German, to a German publication of my late friend Theodor Bergmann. He died at the age of 101. Listen, Victor, and one of his last books was called, in the English translation, Internationalists on Different Frontlines, Spain, China, Vietnam. And he enlisted about 150 Jewish volunteers, communists, socialists, a lot of Trotskyists and anarchists, not to forget, who fought from Spain, and sometimes and some even went to China, where they lived for the rest of their life, and some died in Vietnam. So in the last years, there is an ongoing research on this topic, and I'm very I'm very glad to see that this conference is doing a considerable part to it. Thank you.
I can say briefly, I thank you for bringing this up. I agree with you that there's a lot of research still ongoing on the International Brigades. A book I can recommend is Giles Tremlett, for people who don't know about this and interested. Giles Tremlett, who is the former Guardian correspondent in Madrid, who wrote kind of a comprehensive book for a non-specialized public about the International Brigades 3 or 4 years ago. And that's a great introduction. But you're right, there's a lot of research happening on volunteers from occupied Palestine, from China, from Eastern Europe. It's a fascinating topic. And yeah, and in our magazine, The Volunteer, that comes out every 3 months, we try to sort of keep up with all the research and publish whatever we can about sort of the ongoing research on international volunteers from everywhere in the world.
Annie.
Thank you so much for that. And I partly asked this question in honor of Susan Neiman, one of our organizers, because this brings together two of her interests, but to thank you for the ongoing archive of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. I just re-signed up for the newsletter after, I confess, a lapse, but I was looking up Paul Robeson and discovered in your newsletter, and it may not ring a bell, but a celebration of Paul Robeson's birthday in 2023 in a town whose name I can't pronounce, right outside of Dublin. And this is Susan's, passion for Ireland and the Irish, civil rights, anti-colonial movement, along with her passion for Paul Robeson. So I don't know if that rings a bell, but I want to say thank you for the work you're doing. And if it does ring a bell, tell us more about it, because I was delighted to find that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember publishing the piece. It's the world of those of us who work on the memory of the Spanish Civil War, and especially of the International Brigades. It's a strange world, right? Because it's kind of motley. It's a mix of people all over, and all of us are kind of like obsessed with this history. But we have especially good relationships. We seeking the Lincoln Brigade archives with our sister organizations in the UK and Ireland, and yeah, so there's so much shared interest in this wider legacy. So it seems strange, but it's not in fact strange that there'd be a tribute to Robeson in Ireland. Yeah, so thank you for noticing it, and thank you for signing back up. I have to add that I myself am Dutch, so I'm a weird wandering Dutchman in the United States working on the American memory of these volunteers in Spain. And but we also, as a result, have good relationships with our Dutch sister organization who works on the smaller group, but a significant still group of Dutch volunteers who fought in Spain.
Thank you. Victor, please.
I might just mention that a German young Jewish communist from Berlin escaped Nazi Germany to Holland, then had to run from there and volunteered for Spain and wrote, I've recorded in my book, he wrote about Paul's visit, how all the Americans were so excited at the idea. And he said, "Who's that? Who's Paul Robeson?" He had never heard of him. But then he did hear him and he knew who he was. And not irony, but interesting is that this same fellow was a doctor who helped Paul restore his health in Buch in 1963, enough at least to get home to the United States. He was the main person treating Paul and remembering him from Spain.
Wow. Yeah, but can you remind me of his name, the doctor?
The name was Dr. Alfred Katzenstein.
Alfred Katzenstein.
Alfred Katzenstein. Thank you. Thank you, Victor.
Are there some more comments, observations? Yes, Ben.
I don't know if this entirely fits the mood of what we're discussing, but on the question of the culturalist underpinnings of the other side of the Spanish Civil War, I'm reminded of the fact that the glories of Al-Andalus was used as a recruiting slogan for the Moroccan troops that Franco actually used to cross over. And I just use it as an indication that a culturalist argument can cut both ways, and an actual left argument has tended to be ambivalent. I don't know if this is a useful point at this point in the proceedings, but I thought I would put it on the table for the future.
No, it's super. I mean, it's a super interesting point that you make, and the sort of the presence of cultural nationalism in the Spanish Civil War is very complicated, and as you point out, or as one can point out, in addition to what you're saying, is that the Franco army had North African mercenary soldiers in its ranks. So for people like Robeson, but especially also for Langston Hughes, who traveled to Spain as a journalist, it was shocking to realize that there were North Africans fighting on the fascist side, and there's on the Republican side, as a result, some less than elevating propaganda that plays into negative stereotypes of North Africans as they warn against the dangers of the Franco army. So yeah, that's a really good and the celebration of different cultural legacies of Spain, being the Arab legacy or the Jewish legacy for that matter, by the Franco regime later, is also a super interesting topic that we've published some things on by scholars who work on this. But it's very double and very sometimes unexpected. While I have the floor, I want to point out that since somebody just mentioned that we ran a piece on a tribute to Robeson in Dublin, we also ran a piece last year by Fietje Ausländer, who works for the camp in northern I was going to say in Friesland, in the Emsland camp, and who wrote an amazing piece for us about the history of Piedbach soldiers, the Moorsoldaten, the camp song, which also with Robeson of course also covered. So for those of you who are interested, if you Google Piedbach soldiers and the volunteer, then you'll get to this piece by Fietje Ausländer, which I can highly recommend.
Thank you. We're going to have to draw it to a close now, but I just want to let us thank again Sebastian Faber